In my past life, I hustled and saved every dime to get my boyfriend Daniel through college. He was super touched, promising time and again that he'd tie the knot with me after graduation. He even was my first time, but when graduation rolled around, he suddenly dumped me and hooked up with a city girl instead. Heartbroken, I crashed his wedding and wrecked everything I could grab. He blamed me for ruining his perfect day. Fearing I'd go crazy and wreck his future, he hired someone to run me over. Now, I've been given a second chance. Right now, he just signed up for the college entrance exam and is stressing about tuition. Anna, why are you stressing? Just focus on the test. I got the tuition covered, he said. Daniel stood before me, looking all worried. You know I'm a study whiz. If I take the exam, I'll ace it. It's just my family's broke. I looked at his slightly tanned yet undeniably handsome face, my body shaking uncontrollably. In my past life, he did sign up for the college entrance exam, but was sweating over tuition if he passed. So he came to me to vent about his issues. University students were rare and prized in the 1980s. Knowing his academic chops, I couldn't stand seeing him bogged down by money. I gladly agreed to cover his tuition and living costs for 4 years. But after all my efforts when he graduated, he sent me a letter breaking up with me. I couldn't believe it and confronted him, only to be kicked out. Don't you know your place? He sneered. I'm a college grad now. How could a village girl like you ever measure up? That day, he was midway through his wedding to a rich city girl. He threw $10 at my face and had people chase me away. I was left with no choice and caused a scene at his wedding. He thought I embarrassed him and ruined his big day. Worried I'd keep bothering him, he had his mom wait for me on the road back to the village and arranged for me to be hit by a car. It was the 1980s, and there weren't even security cameras in the village. A death was just a death. My body wasn't found until a month later, already decomposed beyond recognition. The villagers thought I had slipped and fallen while walking in the hills. The village chief had someone bury me, and the matter was dropped. Now my fists clenched tight, and I stared at the repulsive face before me. The rage buried deep inside me exploded like a wildfire. Anna, you hear me? He said, his face full of urgency as he reached out to hug me. Disgusted, I dodged his touch instinctively. He froze for a moment and cautiously asked, Anna, what's up? I gave him a cold stare. In my past life, I discovered after my death that his family's supposed inability to afford tuition was all a front. Their real plan was to save their money for his younger brother Mike, who had been in a 3-year relationship. The family decided to allocate their funds to help Mike marry instead, believing that as a college grad, Daniel's future would be bright, and finding a wife for him later wouldn't be an issue. I, the fool, was their target. They tricked me into funding his education, promising he'd treat me right and marry me once he graduated. I gave him everything only to end up dead. Now that I've been reborn, I'll make sure they suffer a fate worse than death. With that thought, I sneered coldly and confronted him. Can't afford tuition? I heard your mom is saving money to pay for Mike's bride price. $1,000, right? That's not just enough for tuition. It could cover several years of living expenses. So how could you possibly have no money for tuition? Cold sweat instantly dripped down Daniel's face. He stammered, Anna, how do you know about that? He looked down, guilty and flustered. It's true. They're saving up for Mike's bride price, but it's because Sarah's brother is pressuring him to bring out the money, or else she'll break up with him. Mike's useless. If Sarah leaves him, where would he ever find another girl? My mom was planning to deliver the bride price money to Mike in the next few days, thinking it was better to solidify the engagement between him and Sarah to ensure she wouldn't leave him. Daniel avoided my gaze, his eyes darting nervously, and he didn't even dare lift his head. I stared at him relentless, until sweat began to bead and drip from his tense forehead. Suddenly, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I reached out and patted the back of his hand reassuringly. Don't worry, I said earnestly. As long as you get into college, I'll eat scraps and go hungry if I have to, but I'll make sure you can study. He froze for a moment. Then a flash of joy crossed his eyes. Really? But the bride price for Sarah? The money? That money will definitely go to Sarah, I replied with a comforting smile. I'll take responsibility. After all, the oldest sister-in-law is like a mother. Once we're family, it's only right for me to help out. Then, as if a thought had just struck me, I added, By the way, since the bride price is for your brother to get married, what if Sarah takes the money and bails? Wouldn't it be better to have some kind of assurance? Maybe she should get pregnant with someone from your family sooner rather than later. Daniel hesitated briefly, but determination quickly replaced his doubt. That's simple, he said. I'll have my brother lure her to our house a few times. That'll sort it out. I smiled faintly, but my fists clenched so tight that my fingertips turned white. In my past life, Daniel's mom had planned to have me killed by running me over, while Sarah distracted the villagers at the other end of town. They were all banking on Daniel making a name for himself in the city so he could bring them along to live a better life. They were terrified that I'd ruin his future and shatter their family's dreams of wealth. This time, none of them would escape unscathed. After I gave Daniel a firm reply, he left, satisfied. The moment he was gone, all the strength drained from my body, and I collapsed onto the ground. Back then, to support his college education, I endured countless hardships. I even moved to the city and took a dishwashing job near his university to earn more money. When I handed him the money in person, he told me not to show up again, saying my presence would distract him from his studies. So I stopped going to see him. Instead, I saved up every penny and sent it to him. City rents were expensive, and I didn't have much money. I ended up sharing a cramped apartment with some aunts who were also working in the city. Every day, I walked 2 hours to and from work because I didn't dare spend money on bus fare. I felt that every cent I spent meant one less meal for Daniel. I believed that once he graduated and became successful, I would finally live a life of comfort. It was that hope that kept me going for 4 long years. When he finally graduated, I heard he landed a job at a newspaper. I was filled with anticipation, thinking he would come to marry me, but instead I found out he was getting married to the daughter of the newspaper's editor-in-chief. The news hit me like a lightning bolt. I rushed to his wedding, causing a huge scene and smashing everything I could. In the end, he handed me $10 and told his people to send me back where I came from. I stared at the light, flimsy $10 bill in my hands, feeling like the world was spinning. Over the past 4 years, I had spent more than $800 on his tuition alone, not to mention living expenses. He had told me he needed to eat well to avoid being looked down upon by his classmates. I had suffered for 4 years, and all I got in return was a single, meaningless bill. Back then, to convince me to support him, he had sworn and promised to marry me as soon as he graduated. He had even tricked me into giving him my first time. Thinking about my past self, my nose stung and tears flowed uncontrollably. How could I have been so dumb for a guy? I deserved everything I had suffered, wiping away my tears. I pulled a few books from the cabinet. In my past life, I had gone to the city and bought him several college entrance exam prep books as a birthday gift. But there was no need to give him those gifts now. I washed my hands, sat down, and started flipping through the books. The content wasn't unfamiliar to me. In my last life, I had worried that once Daniel graduated, the gap between us would grow too wide. After work, I would hide under my blanket, eating stale bread while studying these books. Whenever I came across something I didn't understand, I'd wait for a free moment during dishwashing breaks. I took the books to the store and asked the college students working part-time there. Each one of them was eager to help, patiently explaining whenever I had questions. Back then, I thought that when Daniel and I got married in the future, he would realize I wasn't just some clueless village girl. Surely he would be pleasantly surprised. But now, I feel grateful to my past self, even though I had to die once. I've paved the way for a better life this time. I borrowed a bicycle from my aunt next door and rode straight to the county high school. When I arrived, I saw my homeroom teacher, Mr. Thompson, cleaning the classroom. He nearly jumped when he saw me. "Anna, didn't you drop out of school? Did you forget something?" In my past life, I had quit school to support Daniel's education. Before I dropped out, my grades had actually been better than his. However, during that time, many girls didn't continue studying past high school. Some supported their boyfriend's education, while others worked to help their families or younger siblings. Mr. Thompson had been particularly regretful about my decision. Girls were already a minority in our class, and I had consistently been one of the top students when he found out I was quitting school to support Daniel. He sighed repeatedly, but ultimately signed my withdrawal form without saying much. Hearing the surprise in his voice now, I smiled at him. "Mr. Thompson, is it too late to take back my withdrawal?" The application had just been submitted the day before. If it hadn't been officially processed yet, I wouldn't even need to reverse it. I could simply continue attending classes. I was 2 years younger than Daniel and currently a freshman in high school. If I re-enrolled now, I'd still have over 2 years before the college entrance exams. There was plenty of time to catch up. I looked at him expectantly, and he, in turn, seemed overjoyed. His face lit up, and with trembling hands, he pulled a crumpled withdrawal form from his pocket. I haven't submitted it yet. Are you sure about this? Once you decide, you can't change your mind again. I'm sure, I said, quickly taking the form and tearing it in half before tossing it into the trash. I had thought it through. The teacher's college had free tuition, wasn't too far from home, and was the best fit for me. In my past life, Daniel attended the architecture university across the street from the teacher's college. This time, I wanted to see how he would fare without me. With the re-enrollment sorted, I finally felt relieved. As I was leaving the school, I spotted Daniel walking out of another building with a group of classmates, pushing his bicycle. It was too late to avoid him. He had already noticed me. "Anna, what are you doing here?" He looked surprised. "Didn't you drop out?" Panic rose in me. I hadn't planned on letting him know about my return to school. If he found out that I no longer intended to support him and was already planning ahead for my own future, wouldn't that ruin my second chance? In a flash, I came up with an excuse. "I'm working nearby," I said, working. His brows furrowed, and he gave me a once-over, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Why aren't you staying in the village? What are you doing here?" I forced a calm smile and blushed, pretending to be shy. "The pay here is better." I thought it would also give me a chance to get used to city life. After all, when we get married, I'll have to live in the city eventually. It's good to adjust in advance. "Right, married." One of his classmates raised an eyebrow in surprise. A flicker of irritation crossed Daniel's face. He quickly pulled me aside and lowered his voice. "Don't say things like that in public. I'm prepping for college. If people find out I have a girlfriend, it won't look good on me." I nodded obediently, though inside I rolled my eyes. Admitting to having a fiancé was suddenly embarrassing for him. Back when he begged me to support his education, promising he'd marry me as soon as he graduated, he hadn't seemed the least bit ashamed. "Go back to the village," he said curtly. I gave him a faint smile, nodded again, and turned away. But inside, I was fuming. This time, I wouldn't let him take advantage of me so easily. Daniel handed me a single dollar for travel expenses and added coldly, "Consider this a loan. Don't come back again." After that day, I didn't see Daniel anymore. With only a month left before the college entrance exams, I didn't see Daniel anymore. With only a month left before the college entrance exams. He stayed at school every day, not even returning home on weekends, to avoid running into me. I used the excuse that my family was busy with farm work and needed more hands. I requested to study at home for the month, since I was only a freshman and still far from taking the exams, and my grades were already excellent. The teachers eventually agreed after I promised I wouldn't let my performance drop. They gave me a pile of practice books and made me promise to complete every single problem before letting me leave. During the day, I worked in the fields, and at night I returned home to study. During this time, I ran into Daniel's mother several times. She saw me working hard in the fields and assumed I was saving money for her son's tuition. Her face lit up with a delighted smile, and she even encouraged me to keep at it, saying, "You'll enjoy the good life later." Thanks to her, life passed in this way, uneventful and unremarkable. Soon enough, the college entrance exams were over. On the afternoon of the last day, Daniel's mother and the rest of his family stood eagerly by the edge of the field, waiting with bated breath. Their faces were shiny with sweat, and the scorching sun had turned their skin greasy, but their excitement was palpable. Finally, Daniel appeared in the distance, riding his large bicycle with a broad smile he couldn't contain. His voice rang out even before he got close. "I nailed it. I finished everything. I'm definitely going to pass this time." He brushed past me without even sparing a glance, heading straight for his mother and younger brother. Mike, this time it's a done deal. Go kill a chicken. Tonight, we'll celebrate properly." His mother beamed with pride at his words, her face lighting up with joy. "I told you, didn't I? My son is so outstanding. Of course, he'll get into college." Mike chimed in with a grin. "When you make it in the city, don't forget to bring us along." Even Sarah, standing next to Mike, gazed at Daniel with admiration. A month passed, and while Sarah showed no signs of pregnancy, she had already pocketed the bride price. Mike pushed her to get married, but she always found excuses, saying her family was busy preparing for her brother's wedding and that they could discuss their plans after things settled down. This made Mike somewhat dissatisfied, but he couldn't say much. He simply made excuses to take Sarah to the woods every so often, a fact that didn't escape the villagers. If it weren't for the fact that Daniel was about to become a college student, the villagers' gossip would have drowned their family in ridicule. Daniel's confident declarations about his future made his family a temporary sensation in the village. His mother paraded her pride everywhere, holding a bag of sunflower seeds as she bragged to anyone who would listen. "Is your kid taking the entrance exams? Look at my Daniel. He's so accomplished. It's so accomplished. It's all about bringing honor to the family. And don't say your child isn't good at studying. How would you know if you don't push them? Studying is simple. My Daniel has never given me a moment's trouble. He'll get into college effortlessly." She then added, her tone dripping with self-importance. "If your kid struggles, my Daniel can tutor them. Only $3 an hour. It's cheaper than hiring someone from outside. And my Daniel is a future college student." At the time, the average monthly wage in the city was only about $30. Charging $3 an hour was outrageous. First, the villagers tolerated her out of politeness. But as time went on, they grew annoyed. They could hear the condescension in her tone and began slamming their doors shut whenever she approached, as no one in the village would entertain her anymore. She visited a family with a mentally challenged son and said, "Your boy may be slow, but he's got a strong will. Who knows, maybe with enough pushing, he'll become the village scholar. If he does well, don't forget to thank my Daniel for inspiring him." That family, fed up, chased her off with a broom, realizing she'd run out of people to impress. She went to a neighboring village to boast about how even her slow Daniel managed to get into college. The neighbor's son, who was in the same year as Daniel and also a freshman in high school, had plenty of time before the college entrance exams. When Daniel's mother boasted about his success, the neighbor lost patience and snapped back. "What nonsense are you spouting? My son is just as good as yours, not better. Get lost." She shoved Daniel's mother out and slammed the door shut. Daniel's mother stood outside with her hands on her hips, fuming. They're just jealous because my Daniel is going to college. Just wait until he makes it big in the city. You'll all come begging me for favors." On the day the exam results were released, the news spread early in the morning. Someone dashed into the village, shivering from the cold but with excitement all over their face. They ran straight to Daniel and announced, "Breathless, you did it! Daniel, you passed. The school called. Go pick up the results." Even though Daniel had expected a good score, his hands trembled uncontrollably at the news. "All right, I'm going now," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. Not long after, he returned, sharing the news that he scored 536 points, 36 points above the admission cutoff for universities. Getting into the architecture school he aimed for was practically guaranteed. Hearing this, Daniel's mother immediately straightened her back and grinned so widely it looked like her face might split. "Didn't I tell you my son would make us proud? He's the glory of the family." She cast a disdainful glance at the envious faces around her. "That's why it's not about how many sons you have. It's about their quality. If they're just going to stay in the village farming, what's the point? Might as well raise cattle instead." The villagers, initially envious, rolled their eyes and dispersed after hearing her condescending remarks. Daniel's mother didn't care. She strutted through the village every day bragging about Daniel's success and casually slipping in praise for her younger son Mike. She even mentioned how proud she was of Mike for getting Sarah pregnant before they were married, despite it being frowned upon. After all, having a son-in-law whose family included a college student brought prestige to their family. Sarah had just discovered her pregnancy, and though it wasn't ideal, the family was thrilled. Daniel's mother sent Mike to town to buy some items and began planning a formal proposal next month. As for Daniel, it seemed he had completely forgotten about me. When the exam results came out, Daniel's school awarded him a substantial scholarship. He took the money, rented a private gaming console at an arcade, and spent most of his time in town, rarely coming back to the village, until he finally returned. It was only 10 days before the university semester started. He arrived on a cart loaded with bags and packages. Stepping off, he proudly announced, "I've got my acceptance letter here. along with all the good stuff I bought in the city. He showed off his gifts, cigarettes and liquor for his father, canned fruit and sugar for his mother, a wristwatch for Mike, and a tape recorder with candies for Sarah. He even brought back a sewing machine for his mother, carried on a rented tricycle. His mother was ecstatic, holding the watch aloft for everyone to see. Look at how thoughtful my son is. He got into college and still remembered to buy us gifts. Just wait. Once he's successful in the city, he'll make sure our family prospers. When all the gifts were distributed, a neighbor who was familiar with my situation asked, "Daniel, didn't you bring anything for Anna? She's been working hard in the fields, saving money for you. Couldn't you at least get her some hand cream or something?" Daniel looked puzzled and replied dismissively, "Why would I buy anything for her? She's not part of my family. Why waste money on her?" After organizing his belongings and resting briefly, Daniel hopped on the bike he bought for Mike and pedaled over to my house. He arrived panting and called out, "Anna, look what I brought for you." He placed the bright red university acceptance letter in front of me. "What do you think? Impressive, right? I told you, sticking with me means you'll enjoy the good life someday." I glanced at him coldly before turning away. "Why are you here?" Daniel hesitated, slightly taken aback by my reaction. "I came to see you. School's starting soon, and I'll be leaving for the city. We won't get to see each other much anymore." I interrupted him sharply. "We've already broken up. You can leave now." He froze, grabbing my wrist. "Broken up? Since when? I didn't hear anything about that." I couldn't help but sneer. "We didn't break up. A month without seeing each other, and it's an unspoken breakup. It's been almost 4 months now. We've been done for a while." "I was prepping for the college entrance exams," he exclaimed, his face flushing red. His voice grew louder as he continued. "And I did it all for you. Once I graduate, you can come with me to the city and live the good life." I scoffed, crossing my arms. "Live the good life? You didn't even bother to buy me anything when you came back. How can I expect you to give me anything in the future?" Annoyed, I stood up, signaling for him to leave. "Go now. You're a college student. Lingering here too long doesn't look good." "I wanted to buy you something," he stammered, quickly standing up and fumbling for an excuse. "But I was worried you wouldn't like it." "How about this? When I get to the city, I'll buy you whatever you want, anything you ask for." I rolled my eyes at him. "Are you leaving or not? If you don't, I'll call someone over." Realizing I wasn't joking, he panicked. "But what about my tuition?" "You have to give me the money." I yanked my hand out of his grip. "Go ask your mom." Daniel had assumed that I would support his education without question, so he had already spent every penny of the scholarship money he received from school. He had even used the money to buy gifts for his family and show them off in the village. When he returned home dejectedly, his mother immediately sensed something was wrong. After some questioning, she found out that I had broken up with him. She was stunned. The family didn't have much money left. Most of it had already been spent on Sarah's bride price, and the rest had been taken by Mike to buy supplies for his upcoming proposal, with only 10 days left before school started. Even if Mike didn't buy the proposal gifts, it still wasn't enough to cover Daniel's tuition. Panicked, his mother paced around the house before deciding to ask the village head for a loan. After all, having a college student in the village was a prestigious affair, and she thought the village head would feel obligated to help. Convinced it was a good idea, she didn't waste a minute and went straight to his house. The village head's grandson had also been accepted into a technical college this year, and they were hosting a celebratory banquet in their yard when she arrived. Breathless, Daniel's mother put on her best smile and cautiously explained her request. She expected the village head to contribute something, but instead, he snorted coldly. "I told you to apply to a technical college back then, but you refused. Now that you've gotten into university, you suddenly want to borrow money?" The village head had been holding a grudge against Daniel ever since his grandson asked to borrow Daniel's notes in high school and was refused. Adding to that, Daniel's excellent exam results had always made the village head feel envious and resentful. When the college applications were being submitted, he had tried to persuade Daniel to apply to the same technical college as his grandson, but Daniel's mother had mocked him for it. Later, when the exam results came out and his grandson's score was far below Daniel's, the village head felt humiliated. Now, seeing Daniel's family come to ask for money, he felt he had finally regained some dignity. You think technical colleges aren't good enough for your son? The village head snapped, glaring at her. If that's the case, why are you even here? Get out of my house before your prestigious college student ruins the atmosphere of my celebration. No, wait, please, Daniel's mother begged, stomping her feet and shouting at the door. But the village head ignored her and slammed the door shut. With no other options, she shamelessly climbed over the wall into the yard. Since many influential villagers and close acquaintances of the village head were attending the banquet, she figured someone might be willing to lend her money. Standing awkwardly in the courtyard, she plastered a smile on her face and earnestly explained her situation, her tone as humble as possible. Despite her efforts, all she received were sneers and mocking remarks. If you don't have money, why bother sending him to university? What's the point of studying if you can't afford it? Someone jeered, causing the crowd to burst into laughter. How is it better for me to lend you money than to buy myself an old ox? One villager scoffed, eyeing Daniel's mother with disdain. Your son is smart, all right. Spent all his scholarship money on gifts for your family and now turns to us for tuition. What? Your plan is to send a college student through school without spending a cent yourselves. Another villager chimed in. Exactly. Your family struts around like royalty, and we're supposed to eat scraps to fund Daniel's education? If we lend you money, should we expect it back or not? If you pay us back and Daniel graduates, becomes a village official, and then holds it against us, what then? But if you don't pay it back, why should we give you money in the first place? Your son didn't learn for nothing. He's clearly good at accounting. Laughter erupted around them, making Daniel's mother's face flush with embarrassment. Flustered, she stammered, It's not like it's free. There will be interest. Someone in the crowd retorted. And if Daniel settles down in the city and moves your whole family there, how are we supposed to collect interest then? Unable to endure the ridicule any longer, Daniel's mother stormed off, humiliated. On her way home, she encountered a group of people she often used to boast to, with no other options. She swallowed her pride and asked them for a loan, only to be met with jeers. Well, isn't this the family with a fancy bicycle, a tape recorder, and a sewing machine? Meanwhile, we can't even afford a sewing machine of our own. How can we possibly lend you money? Why don't you ask the people who can afford to pay for tutoring at $3 an hour? Surely they won't mind covering a little tuition for you. Or better yet, have Daniel tutor people around the clock. He could save up the tuition in 10 days if he really works hard. Her face turned red and white with fury and frustration. She wanted to lash out at them, but held back, knowing she couldn't afford to alienate anyone further. Instead, she glared at them and spat out, Fine, if you won't lend me money, plenty of others will. My son is a college student. People will be lining up to help us. Despite her bravado, she returned home empty-handed. She spent the entire night pacing the house, unable to sleep. The next morning, in a desperate move, she went to the neighboring village to ask the family with a mentally challenged son for help. But they had already heard the gossip. Before she even reached their doorstep, they drove her away with a broom. Get lost, the man of the house shouted. My son may be slow, but I'm saving every penny to make him the next village scholar. You've got a lot of nerve coming here to ask for money. She stood there, swallowing her pride. Get out of here and don't come back. By the time Daniel's mother returned home, she was seething. She vented her frustration by berating Daniel for hours. Finally, her anger boiled over, and she declared, This is all Anna's fault. She started this whole mess, so she's going to fix it. Who does she think she is, deciding to break up just like that? I won't allow it. I'll get the money from her myself. That afternoon, when most of the villagers had returned from the fields, Daniel's mother marched to my house. She pounded on the door, shouting loudly enough for the entire village to hear. Anna, get out here right now, she bellowed, hammering the door. I stayed calm, continuing to read inside until a crowd had gathered around my door. Once there was no space left for anyone else, I leisurely got up and opened the door. The moment she saw me, she raised her voice even louder. Anna, what is the meaning of this? You promised to support my son's education, and now you suddenly break up with him? Do you have someone else on the side? I had anticipated this and was ready. Stepping out, I slapped her across the face without hesitation. Someone else? Why don't you ask your son what he's been up to? I said coldly. Someone else? Why don't you ask your son what he's been up to? I repeated coldly. He disappeared for months without a word. came back with bags full of gifts and not a single thing for me. I took that as a silent agreement to break up. But now that tuition is due. You remember me? What do you think I am? A fool? A piggy bank? She gaped at me, but I wasn't done. Let me make this clear. I don't have any money for you. If he can afford to buy watches and sewing machines, then he can figure out how to pay his own tuition. Unfazed, she crossed her arms and shouted back, "Watches and sewing machines don't cost that much. When he makes it big, won't you still benefit from it?" I laughed bitterly. Benefit? From him? Let me tell you something. If I've learned one thing, it's that I'll never let anyone take advantage of me again. You should feel lucky to have a college student like my son. Daniel's mother sneered. Do you think he'd even look at you if you didn't put in any effort? What do you bring to the table for someone like him to want you? I let out a cold laugh. If anything, it's him who wants me, not the other way around. Her face twisted in anger. Nonsense, my son doesn't want you. Have you looked in a mirror lately? A village girl like you has no place being with my son. I didn't even bother responding. Perfect. We don't want each other. Done. I didn't even bother responding. Perfect. We don't want each other. Goodbye, I said, slamming the door shut. From outside, I could hear her pounding on the door, screaming, Anna, open this door right now. How dare you go back on your word? As her shouting continued, a neighbor walking by stopped and loudly interjected. Your son is the one who's done wrong, and you have the nerve to come here yelling at Anna. Daniel's mother froze. The woman snorted, full of disdain. My nephew saw Daniel in the red light district when he was in town, apparently. He didn't leave until the next morning, with dark circles under his eyes. Looks like he had quite the night. Another villager chimed in. Oh, that's why. I saw a young man walking out of there when I went to buy clothes in town. I thought he looked familiar, and now I realize it was Daniel. The two of them went back and forth, painting a vivid picture of Daniel's escapades. Their words quickly stirred a buzz among the gathered villagers. A fresh high school graduate already acting like this? What's he going to be like in a few years? One murmured. And here I thought he was a college student. Turns out he's just a disgrace, hiding behind a degree. No wonder Mike got that girl pregnant. This whole family is rotten. The crowd exchanged glances, their disdain clear. Daniel's mother turned pale, her face a mix of embarrassment and fury. Shut up, all of you, shut up! She shouted, pushing her way out of the group before fleeing in humiliation. As the commotion outside quieted down, I opened my door, walked out, and handed two $2 bills to the two women who had spoken up. Thank you, Anis, I said politely. One of them waved it off with a smile. No need to thank us. We've had enough of that family. Besides, remember how they spread those false rumors about you back then? This is just karma. Exactly, the other added, nudging her friend. Daniel always pretends to be honest, but deep down, he's full of schemes. Who knows what he's really been up to? They both laughed and promised to help again if needed before leaving. Meanwhile, Daniel's mother stormed back home to find him still lying in bed. Get me Mike's bride price, he demanded. I'll use it to pay my tuition and repay it to Sarah later. Just tell her it's a loan. His mother shook her head firmly. Sarah's pregnant with Mike's child. I had someone check. She's definitely expecting. How can we ask for the bride price back now? It would be a disaster. She's already carrying his kid. Of course she'll marry into the family, Daniel shouted, his temper flaring. Just get the money for me. Once I've made it in the city, I won't forget everything she's done for us. As luck would have it, Sarah overheard this entire conversation. She stormed in, clutching her stomach, and glared at Daniel and his mother. If you so much as mention returning the bride price, I'll abort this baby, she said coldly. This is your family's first grandchild. If you want to be known as the family that killed its future, then go ahead. You decide what's more important. Her words left Daniel's mother in a panic. She grabbed Daniel by the sleeve and begged quietly, let it go. Please. It's your fault for spending all the scholarship money. If you'd save some, we wouldn't be in this mess. Scholarship money. If you'd save some, we wouldn't be in this mess. Daniel's face turned red with rage. I did everything for you, he shouted at Sarah, his anger spilling over. I used my scholarship money to buy things for your wedding. Now I can't go to college. All because of you. And what about the future? When I make it big in the city, won't you benefit from it? What about the future? When I make it big in the city, won't you benefit from it? Sarah looked at him coldly. Who knows about the future? Right now, the bride price is in my hands, and I'm not giving it back. End of story. Daniel turned to his mother for support, but she had clearly taken Sarah's side. To her, the prospect of a first grandchild far outweighed Daniel's university acceptance letter. He stared at the two of them, his expression darkening as frustration boiled inside him. Short-sighted fools, he muttered under his breath. With only 3 days left before school started, Daniel should have been on a train headed to university by now. Instead, he paced back and forth in the courtyard, his chest heaving with anger and despair. His thoughts churned as he tried to come up with a solution, but no matter how he spun it, there was no clear way out. He started going door to door, knocking and bowing his head to beg for tuition money. However, because his family had flaunted their wealth too much in the past and were not well liked in the village, most people turned him away. The rumors about him frequenting the red light district in the city didn't help either. Many villagers mocked him, some sneering openly, while others simply claimed that they were struggling themselves and shut their doors in his face. Only a few families, feeling some pity, gave him symbolic amounts, just enough to show some sympathy. After a whole morning of begging, Daniel's forehead was bruised and bleeding, but all he managed to collect was enough for travel expenses, still far from what he needed for tuition. Exhausted, he sat on the ground, defeated, his spirit completely crushed. Word travels fast in a village, and soon an aunt came to inform me about Daniel's next plan. He's scheming to trick you into going to the old storage room behind Mr. Lee's house, she whispered. Once you're there, he plans to trap you and force you into marrying him. That way, whether you agree to pay for his tuition or not, you'll have no choice but to go along with it. I smiled calmly, thanked her, and handed her $2 as a token of appreciation. The aunt left, and not long after, Daniel's mother showed up in my yard, her face unusually pleasant, her voice sweet as honey. She grabbed my hand warmly. Anna, about you and Daniel, he knows he made a mistake, all right? He handled things poorly, but tomorrow he's heading off to university. And who knows when he'll be back again. He really wants to see you before he leaves. He's waiting for you at the old storage room behind Mr. Lee's house. Can't you at least meet him for old time's sake? I stopped cracking sunflower seeds and glanced at her lazily. So, he managed to gather enough tuition money? Yes, he did. He managed to pull it all together yesterday, she said, her enthusiasm bubbling over as she shoved a can of orange-flavored soda into my hands. Here, Daniel told me to bring this for you. It's from the city, really good stuff. Take it with you and enjoy it on the way. She practically ran off after completing her task, as if relieved to have checked it off her list. I weighed the can in my hand. It was indeed a rare treat, something I might have once foolishly taken as a token of his affection, but not anymore. As I stepped outside, I spotted Sarah passing by my house, smirking. I handed her the soda. Here, for you. A gift from Daniel. Her face twisted in confusion as she eyed me suspiciously. Why would he give me this? What do you mean? I grinned, clearly enjoying her discomfort. Daniel wants to get back together with me. He even brought me a bunch of these sodas from the city. I figured you probably haven't had anything this nice before, so I'm giving you one to try. Sarah's expression darkened as I leaned closer, lowering my voice just enough to sting. I bet Mike never gave you anything this fancy. Thing? I bet Mike never gave you anything this fancy. Huh, she scoffed, snatched the can from my hand and popped it open, taking 2 big gulps. She spat back. You sly fox. I don't know what tricks you pulled to get Daniel wrapped around your finger. But let me tell you this, if you think you're going to marry him, don't forget that half of what he earns will still go to Mike and me. Really? I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Daniel doesn't seem to think so. He told me all his money is mine. Oh, and he mentioned that not only was his high school scholarship paid for, but his university tuition is free too. You know, I continued, he said he only asked you all for money to use as my dowry. What? Sarah's face flushed with anger. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice conspiratorially. Oh, and one more thing. The stuff he bought you with his scholarship, that barely cost him anything. The rest? He gave it all to me yesterday. Don't believe me? See for yourself. He's waiting for me right now at the old storage room behind Mr. Lee's house. Go check if you don't believe me. See for yourself. He's waiting for me right now at the old storage room behind Mr. Lee's house. Go check if you don't believe me. Sarah, who was always quick to anger, bit the bait immediately. Her face twisted with fury as she growled, "Wait here, I'm going to see for myself. If what you're saying is true, I'll make him pay for giving our money to an outsider." She stormed off, soda can in hand, but not before slamming it into the ground, sending it skittering into the ditch. I contacted the village aunt and asked her to gather some people in half an hour to catch someone at the old storage room behind Mr. Lee's house. I didn't know what Daniel might have put in that orange soda, but it was likely one of the usual tricks. The old storage room was dark and enclosed, with only a sliver of light coming in through a small corner window. Faces were nearly impossible to make out, and since Sarah and I had similar builds, even if Daniel realized it wasn't me, just being caught alone with his sister-in-law would be enough to ruin him. Meanwhile, I stayed comfortably in my room, snacking on sunflower seeds and listening carefully for any commotion. Half an hour passed, and the village seemed quiet, without any unusual activity. I patiently waited another 20 minutes before I saw a group of about a dozen people hurrying past my house. A while later, I noticed several young men carrying a stretcher toward the van at the village entrance. Following them was Daniel's mother, wailing hysterically, "You beast! That's your sister-in-law! How could you do this?" Her cries echoed, mixed with Daniel's screams and Mike's enraged shouts as he slammed things around. Curious, I leaned out to ask the aunt who had come over. She gave me a knowing look, her expression laced with amusement. Glancing around to make sure no one else was nearby, she covered her mouth and whispered with a chuckle, "What a mess! That college boy from the Daniel family assaulted his sister-in-law. She's pregnant, and now she's bleeding badly." I covered my mouth in feigned shock. "What? That's insane. Was it consensual or forced?" "It looked forced," the aunt said, clicking her tongue in disapproval. "When we got there, the poor girl was unconscious. Daniel seemed totally oblivious, still grinning like a fool. Who knows if she passed out from the assault or sheer fright? Not long after, the police arrived and took Daniel into custody on the spot." His mother collapsed to the ground, wailing, "Who called the cops? This is a family matter." What a disaster. That evening, Daniel's mother barged into my house, screaming at the top of her lungs, "You wretched girl! Get out here!" I calmly opened the door. The recent events had turned the village into a buzzing hive of gossip, with small groups gathering everywhere to discuss the scandal. Her face was twisted with rage. And she shrieked, "You gave that orange soda to Sarah. She's pregnant. And you poisoned her. How could you be so cruel?" She lunged at me, grabbing my neck with both hands in a desperate grip. I pushed her off lightly, and she stumbled to the ground. Smiling, I said, "Oh, so you admit there was something in the soda? Was it your doing, or was it Daniel's?" Her eyes widened in horror. "You're talking nonsense. I didn't put anything in the drink." "Then it must have been Daniel," I said, holding up the soda can. "I picked it up after you left. If there's anything in it, the police can easily find out." "No, don't let them test it," she screamed, lunging at me again. But this time, I stepped aside, revealing the police officers standing behind me. I handed the soda can to the officers and said firmly, "Officers, I'd like to report a crime. My ex-boyfriend, Daniel, attempted to drug and harm me." Daniel's mother froze, her face drained of color. She stumbled back 3 steps, stammering, "It wasn't my son. He's a college student. You can't arrest him." "It was me. I did it. If someone has to be arrested, take me." At the officer's command, she was taken away, still sobbing and shouting incoherently. The rest of the story, I heard from the village head. Daniel confessed to everything during his interrogation. The soda had indeed been spiked with a sedative. Sarah, who had drunk the entire can, passed out shortly after entering the storage room. Daniel, unable to see clearly in the dim light, mistook her for me and assaulted her. Sarah, who was less than 3 months pregnant, suffered severe complications from the assault. This time, Sarah experienced massive bleeding. The small-town clinic couldn't handle such a critical condition, and the delay in transporting her to the hospital only worsened the situation. By the time she arrived, the baby was already gone. Sarah barely survived, but the damage left her unlikely to have children in the future. The incident caused an irreparable rift between Daniel and Mike. They openly turned against each other. Their relationship completely shattered. However, Daniel refused to admit that he had spiked the drink. He claimed his mother had only passed the message to me but wasn't involved in the drugging itself. In the end, to reduce her son's sentence, Daniel's mother took full responsibility for adding the sedative. Daniel was sentenced to 3 years in prison for assaulting Sarah, while his mother received a 2-year sentence for spiking the drink. With the verdict, Daniel's dream of being a college student was completely destroyed. Mike and Sarah eventually got married, but the marriage was far from happy. Mike couldn't move past what had happened between Sarah and his brother and resented the fact that Sarah could no longer have children. The two of them fought constantly, loud, vicious arguments that often ended with the sound of pots and dishes breaking, their quarrels audible from far away. Peace was a rare visitor in their household. Meanwhile, my semester grades came out. I ranked first in my class and fifth in the entire grade, with 2 more years of hard work. Getting into a top university wasn't out of reach. In my past life, I had staked everything on Daniel. I gave him everything I had, supporting him unconditionally, believing that when he became successful, I would share in his glory. But in the end, he became a traitor like Chan Shimi, and I met a tragic death. This time around, I finally understood. Relying on others is futile, mountains can crumble, and trees can fall. Trusting anyone else is no match for relying on myself. I had endured the worst in my past life. Whatever hardships lay ahead, I would face them head on. Nothing could be more difficult than what I had already survived.